Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today I am joined by Mitch Anderson, who is one of the two longest running PCs with Tellwell, and Tellwell is reaching 10 years this year, so that says a lot. Thanks for being here, Mitch.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to join any of these little new endeavors from Tellwell.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can you just start off by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and maybe how this journey in the self-publishing industry came to be for you?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one thing that I like, it's talking about myself and talking about books. So my name's Mitch Anderson, as we covered here. I was the first full-time publishing consultant here at Tellwell, followed quickly by Scott Lunn. So we've been here since essentially day one. As for me personally, I am a father of two. So I have two little boys who I have to balance amongst all this love. But I mean, they get endless amounts of books and get to help do a little bit of research on our children's book authors' work for them, which they appreciate. But yeah, beyond that, I graduated from York University with my English Literature Honors BA, and shortly afterwards, upon coming back here to Victoria, I saw Tellwell starting up and reached out and have been here ever since, and it's been a fantastic home for me and has seen me get married, have children, buy a home, and essentially Tellwell's always been there to support me and everybody who's associated with me over the last 10 years, and I couldn't be happier to be part of the company.
That's amazing. It really is a company that you have been with kind of from those grassroots until present day. And I'm sure the company has evolved quite a lot in the time since you've been here. We do have a couple of myths that are related to self-publishing. And when the topic came across the desk, I was encouraged to connect with you directly about this topic because, as will be further evidence throughout this podcast, it is a topic that you are passionate about. So we can go ahead and jump right in. There are actually 15 self-publishing myths here that we are going to discuss and you are going to debunk throughout this process today. So if you are ready, we can get started.
I am absolutely ready. I have been looking forward to this. There's a lot more than 15 myths out here, but these are absolutely the best and most important ones to get out of the way. So let's see if we can just provide a little bit of clarity to our authors here as they embark on this journey.
Perfect. Let's do it. So number one is that self-publishing is only for people who cannot get published traditionally.
Well, now. Starting off with a doozy. So this one is one of my favorite ones to debunk because it kind of gets to the heart of most of the myths out there, which unfortunately come about as the result of a lot of gatekeeping by authors who are traditionally published. The can't get published traditionally is very frequently choose not to get published traditionally for most self-published authors. So a lot of the disparagement around self-publishing comes from those authors who have been able to achieve self-publishing or achieve traditional publishing and tend to sneer on those who did not achieve their lofty goals, which is not fair. There's dozens and dozens of reasons why an author may choose to self-publish rather than traditionally publish their books. With modern approaches to distribution and fulfillment, there's really nothing that a traditional publisher can do that a self-published author can't. Absolutely. Most of the misconception is around things like the distribution and marketing and getting the book into bookstores and getting people to become aware of it. That's nothing special or unique to the publishers at the end of the day. It's something that's easily achieved as long as you know what to do and whom you should be doing it to, which is something that we help out with here. Through modern distribution and print on demand, there are direct pipelines to bookstores for authors. So the benefits, well, actually, let's just switch back to the marketing quickly. Even at a traditional publisher, you only receive marketing season for essentially the equivalent of a season. anywhere from 3 to 6 months, not a ton of long-term consistent marketing before the emphasis really shifts back onto the author, who very frequently doesn't have a very good idea of what to do going forwards. With us, we don't pretend that reality is anything but reality. So our goal is to always make sure that authors who work with us are prepared to handle things themselves, and even in collaboration with us, so that they know exactly where to be spending their time and what they should be doing. So self-publishing is certainly not for authors who cannot get published traditionally. It's mostly for authors who desire to keep control of their copyright or make the vast majority, if not all, of their royalties, and otherwise just have the personal control and flexibility to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves for their book.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And not to mention retaining your creative and your commercial copyrights are all very important, which only really come about when you self-publish your own book and are in charge of your own fate, as it were.
I think that's something that is often overlooked. We spend all of this time as authors kind of pouring into a manuscript. I mean, I wrote and self-published a children's book, so my manuscript is a little shorter than some of the ones that might come across the desks of those here at Tellwell. But with that being said, there's so much of ourselves that are poured into these words and these projects, and the idea of, pursuing traditional publishing is all well and good, but when it comes to some of those things that maybe do resonate a little bit closer to the chest, I think self-publishing is a really great route to kind of maintain full control of your vision. When you sign over your manuscript to a traditional publisher, you don't really know what's going to happen, what's going to be changed, and you kind of surrender all of those rights through that process. So the next myth that we have here is that self-published books are poor in quality.
That's a tricky one, honestly, at the end of the day, because quality tends to be in the eye of the beholder, and everybody judges this a little bit differently. Are we judging quality based on the actual physical construction of a book, or are we judging it based on the appearance and layout and content of the book? Because they're both very different things. So if we're talking about the construction of a printed self-published book, it's of the utmost quality and indistinguishable from what you'd get from a major traditional publisher. The paperweights, quality, and everything like that are well above what the standards are for traditional publishing. You would perhaps not have access to quite as many print options were you to be printing thousands of books and having them shipped to your home, as print on demand in distribution tends to be heavily standardized. So they have a large selection, but not every single thing. But the construction and quality, binding, and everything around the books is impeccable. Chef's kiss at the end of the day. Where the trick comes in at the end of the day, and where I feel most of the reputation for poor quality comes in, is around hastily or poorly thought out designs. By that I mean interior layouts or cover designs, or fiction or nonfiction books that have neglected to have their interiors edited professionally and have instead gone forward with perhaps maybe a friends and family edit or personal edits. Those are the type of books that on the outside look amazing, but once you open them up, it tends to become evident that not as much thought has been put into them as could be. And that's a difficult line for a self-publishing company like Tellwell, for example, to walk. Because to a degree, authors are paying us to create the book that they envision, not the one that we think that they should be publishing.
Right.
And we don't want to be taking a stab in the dark and creating designs and layouts that an author ultimately may not identify with or even hate. That's the opposite of what we want to do. So that's the tricky line that we have to walk between doing what we think is best versus what our authors have requested of us, which is why as a consultant, we always emphasize to our authors, please put lots of thought into how your book is going to appear. Do lots of research, take pictures, have a vision board, share with us what it is that you want so that we can get as close as possible on the first try to getting there and then fine tune things from there. I frequently tell authors, we are amazing publishers, and we are. But where we tend to let people down is the fact that we are horrible mind readers. Have a real hard time seeing inside here.
Yeah.
So the better you can do in communication, the more reference you can provide us, and the more thought put into the appearance of your book, the utmost quality is what you'll get at the end of the day, and something that you can be proud of.
Absolutely.
So I would say that's where that myth comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's really within the author's control to debunk that one through their efforts.
Absolutely. I also think seeing that myth is maybe a result of those who choose to go the full kind of DIY route for self-publishing. Wow. They're playing designer, editor, distributor, they're project managing the entire process from, conception to publishing. And it's okay, I think, to recognize and admit when you are not an expert in a specific field. You have produced this wonderful manuscript that you want to put into the hands of others and your readers. And if that's where it ends in terms of your contribution, other than kind of overseeing the next steps, that is okay. It is okay to say, designing a book cover that's going to jump off the shelves is not in my wheelhouse and I need help for that. Or similarly with editing, I wrote the book, but I can't go through it and tell you that it's 100% grammatically correct. So having a second pair of eyes kind of look over that project, I think is where there is opportunity for improvement when it comes to the quality standards.
I agree. I could hypothetically build a motorcycle myself, but I'm certainly not going to, because I would almost certainly do it poorly. So.
And you're not going to ride it either.
Certainly not.
The next myth is that you don't need to market a self-published book.
You need to publish or market every type of published book, whether it's traditionally published, self-published, or anything in between. At the end of the day, simple availability is nowhere near enough. Just because a book is there does not guarantee that anybody is going to see it, hear about it, be interested in it, or anything in between. I frequently tell authors that the distinction between distribution and marketing is an important one to remember. Distribution will be the logistics of getting your books from the printer into the hands of the retailers and customers who want it, and it is available to tens of thousands of retailers around the world. But marketing is going to be getting them to want it. It's a fair assumption for a self-published author that if they're not talking about their book, then no one else is either. I have seen some truly phenomenal books just fall by the wayside because no one's heard of them. And I have seen some spectacularly mediocre projects absolutely soar because their authors were enthusiastic and engaging about them, and everything in between. So the reality is, yes, you do have to market your book. Even at a traditional publisher, as I mentioned earlier, the emphasis will rest back on the author, because think about it as a reader. Would you want to talk to the publisher, or would you want to talk to the author of the book that you're reading? Right? So we don't pretend it's any other way, and our goal is to make sure that our authors understand the industry that they're in, what's going to be required of them, and the best and most efficient way of going out to achieve that, because we don't want our authors spinning their wheels and getting burnt out with all the misinformation they find on the internet, and it is appalling. We want to cut straight to the chase with strategies that our own marketing consultants put into action every day with their authors, so that our authors can go out, have a positive experience, recoup their investments, and maybe come back and see us for another book, or say very nice things about us to everybody they meet. Both are good.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that marketing is going to be very important. And the more you believe in yourself and your book, the better that book is going to do.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I think as someone who comes from a marketing background, seeing kind of the opportunity that is available to authors, especially in today's day and age with social media, It really levels the playing field, I think, for many authors, whether they are traditionally published, self-published. You have the ability to create and connect with an audience. And, you do at the end of the day kind of get what you put into it. And
Very
so
much.
yes. So if you are, just kind of sitting back and twiddling your thumbs and waiting to see the book sales come flooding in, unfortunately, that is not the likelihood.
Have you been listening to my conversations?
It sounds like we're on the same page here. So the next myth that we have to debunk is that self-publishing means you have to do everything yourself.
Okay, so this is where the term self-publishing tends to be a bit too much of an umbrella term. Really, it gets divided down into DIY, do-it-yourself, self-publishing, and assisted self-publishing. Here at Tellwell, we're a full-service assisted self-publishing company, so one end of the spectrum. Do-it-yourself self-publishing is the very other end of the spectrum, as we just touched on in our last myth there. So while it's possible to do everything yourself, very few people are writers, editors, designers, illustrators, marketers, project managers, and everything in between. Simply, even if you're finding your own contractors to work on the book for you, rather than a company like ourselves who has everybody under one roof, you are still nominating yourself as an author to project manage something you likely do not have any experience with.
Right.
It's been our experience rescuing authors from that scenario that very often more time, energy, and unfortunately finances are spent trying to pursue that path than it would be cutting straight to the chase on a company like ourselves or even some of our more reputable competitors out there. Less reputable than ourselves, of course. But yeah. At the end of the day, the self-publishing does not mean you have to do it all yourself. Not at all. It comes down to the fact that an author simply doesn't know what they don't know. And if they try to do that all themselves, they're going to miss things. So with us, we want to be the ones guiding, collaborating. And it's nice because when you work with a self-publishing company, there tends to be far more in the way of communication and accountability. As the book moves from one stage to another, it's always going to be in the right format. There's communication between the team members working on the book. And if something doesn't come out to your expectations, or more importantly, your specifications, then there's recourse and people who are dedicated to supporting you rather than freelancers who may be more interested in keeping their profit margin high by not doing revisions or rushing through things, or God forbid, utilizing AI in the publication of their book, which will put your book dead in the water before you get anywhere. So absolutely. Yeah, it's not do everything yourself. While you can, you probably shouldn't. I certainly wouldn't, and I've been doing this for an awfully long time.
I think what you had said about, going the route of maybe hiring a freelancer and how they are not invested in your project in the way that someone with a reputation to uphold, would be as well. And I think that that's also something that's really worth noting. So the next myth here is that self-publishing isn't profitable.
What an interesting myth here, and I have heard it before, but if self-publishing isn't profitable, just what type of publishing is the question I frequently pose to my authors, because at a traditional publisher and many, many self-publishing companies, an author is on a 10% fixed royalty. So that means a book that sells for maybe $16 makes you $1.60, or $20 makes you $2. That's about as little as you possibly could make off of a book sale, because that publisher has to take their cut and any number of other entities involved do as well. Mm-hmm. For authors, their slightly misinformed assumption is that the traditional publisher will have inroads to their bookstores, will be able to get promotional material in the windows, and will insist on a wide distribution across every location, brick and mortar store of a chain. That does not happen for anything other than the largest and most reputable of books. Currently, I think that title goes to one Miss Rebecca Yarros and her Fourth Wing series, as that book is everywhere.
Did you read Onyx Storm yet?
No, my wife is currently in the audiobook version of it, very invested.
No
I'm
spoilers.
personally, please don't, I'm invested in the newest Brandon Sanderson doorstopper of a novel. So going back to it there, as for being unprofitable, yeah, it really depends on which publishing company you do tend to work with, as it can be very predatory out there, and more goes unsaid than is disclosed to authors. So at many self-publishing companies, beyond charging you for their services, they will take a portion of your royalty, they will mark up the print-on-demand cost, or frequently build in an extra little cut for themselves under creative names. Well, a royalty at its essence is the list price for the book minus the retailer's percentage minus the print cost, which is how it works here at Tellwell. The way they work at their essence is how it works here. So when you do the math, once you break it down, the royalty you make at a company like Tellwell that gives 100% net royalties, it's the most you can possibly make off the sale of a book. If you understand most books to have an average print cost of about $5, well then most books that sell for $20 will have a royalty of $5 or $7. And I don't know about our authors, but I would generally make anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 times more off of each book sale than I would elsewhere. Recoup that money 2.5, 3 times faster. And that's everything about our goals here, is to help our authors make that money back. And depending on the approaches and your opportunities, there are certain ways of selling the books, certain opportunities that mean you can recoup your investment very quickly and be very profitable with your book. So this one very much is a myth. Self-publishing is always more profitable than traditional publishing if the same number of books are sold. The downside is that when a self-published book hits the market, authors are frequently disinclined to put the effort into marketing their book and engaging with people about it. And that's where the disparity between the profits of a self-published book and a traditional published book usually lie, is in the efforts put behind the marketing of said book. So
absolutely,
it is a myth, it is profitable, but you get out of it what you put into it.
That seems to be an ongoing theme here throughout this episode. So it's a good reminder. Absolutely. And this is a great segue actually into the next myth here, which is that traditional publishing is always more credible.
Ooh, always more credible to who? There is a certain amount of credibility that goes along with traditional publishing. The reason why is that a traditionally published book will always have undergone a rigorous editorial process. That means multiple people were involved to provide critical but constructive feedback to make sure that the book is going to be the best version of itself that it can be. This frequently happens across multiple rounds of revision until the book reaches the satisfaction of the publisher, not necessarily the author. But that's why traditional publishing has that reputation of credibility and quality. Whereas with self-publishing, it tends to suffer from a legacy of books that were done before the modern way of doing things. So with modern self-publishing, we have print on demand and distribution and direct inroads to the bookstores. This did not exist before, so the challenge in getting your book into the bookstore shelves really brought down the credibility of those self-published works. These days, that is not the case, but the perception is still part of the legacy. So it is very much in the eye of the beholder, again, in my opinion. You know, that historical way of doing things has created our collective opinion that a book worth publishing is only done by traditional publishers.
Right.
If a traditional publisher doesn't have the time for your book, I don't have the time for it either. Well, excuse me, but a traditional publisher has a wait list of several years with dozens, if not hundreds of books in the pipeline, and many of them are not even accepting solicitations. That has nothing to do with the quality of the book an author has written.
Right.
So if an author chooses not to be subject to the approval of an agent and then a publisher and then a wait list and then their editor, then they choose to go with self-publishing. Ideally, they will have allowed us and our incredible team of editors to work with them on that on that editing. But some authors choose to handle their editing themselves, and sometimes that is of mediocre or subpar quality. That is the difficult line in self-publishing. If a new reader picks up a book that has not been professionally edited, well, then the credibility of self-publishing plummets. If it's been incredibly well edited by our team or equally proficient editors out there, well, then the reputation tends to climb or even stay even because people simply assume that our impeccable quality books were traditionally published. That's not the worst thing in the world as long as they recognize our name at the end of the day. But yeah, traditional publishing has the perception of being more credible. In practicality, it is not in any way, shape, or form. But we do have to give that strong emphasis to our authors. Please, please
Absolutely.
Have your book professionally edited.
If nothing else, the professionally edited
Nothing else.
final product
Please.
is worth having.
It is.
The next myth here is that you have to be tech savvy to self-publish.
You know what? This one's actually kind of true to a degree. If you were to be doing the do-it-yourself self-publishing, wrangling all of your freelancers and making sure that everything's being provided in the right formats, resolutions, perspectives, and everything else associated with it, then yes, you absolutely have to be tech savvy. You have to have experience, in-depth experience in aspects like or programs like Microsoft Word, Adobe InDesign, distribution platforms like Ingram Spark and their ins and outs, and Amazon, and everything in between. So yeah, tech savvy is a benefit in that situation. The need to be tech savvy tends to fade to the background when you're working with a company like ourselves. You have to be capable on a computer, but really the level of difficulty is similar to that of attaching something to an email. If you are able to follow clear instructions, which we have in abundance, and you are comfortable asking questions if you do not know or are unsure, then you're going to have no problems whatsoever publishing with us. But we are honest. We don't mislead our authors. So when your book is on the market and you need to engage for the marketing around certain aspects like social media, then yeah, it can really benefit you to at least be comfortable on a computer or with your phone. If you are a Luddite by choice, you may need to reassess that choice before you self-publish, as it's going to be quite difficult. That being said, we have gotten 90-year-old plus World War II veterans through this process.
Yes.
So and he was very apathetic. So if he can do it, I am sure any of our authors can as well, as long as they believe in themselves and their work.
Absolutely. And I think, the process we have heard time and time again as well is one that is user-friendly. It is one that really supports that guided process also.
That's a good point. And one thing I forgot to mention is to assist with this, Tellwell has always been a company that listens to our authors and their feedback. And we've spent well over half of our lifespan here at Tellwell developing and improving a platform specifically created for our authors and our process. It is simply a website they log into. It is guided. It gives information in easy to understand ways. It goes over things like production timelines, royalties, what an author's next task is, and what ours is. So rather than trying to keep track of everything through email as you'd find at most publishers, a very guided step-by-step process is always available for our authors to help keep things moving smoothly and to minimize mistakes and minimize frustration.
Absolutely. And this is actually a really good pivot point because the next myth here has to do with the overall process and whether self-publishing is a quick and easy one to navigate.
So my inclination based on my experience is to say yes, absolutely. It is a quick and easy process, but that is based on my experience. So in publishing, the average self-publishing, the average timeline for a turnaround is about 8 to 9 months, even up to a year. With us here at Tellwell, we have more hands on deck because we simply work with more authors in more markets than others do. So we are able to produce a book in roughly half the time that other publishers do without sacrificing anything around quality or attention. There's simply just more people here to make your book a reality. So with us, it's about 4 months, give or take 2 weeks. A children's book, a bit closer, 5 to 6 months, especially if being illustrated. So comparatively speaking, very quick. Now, easy. Easy is dependent on each author, their level of tech savviness that we mentioned earlier. Some authors find it very easy while other authors struggle. The struggles, though, in my experience, usually arise from authors who aren't familiar with a particular aspect of self-publishing, and then rather to look to us for help, they'd simply rather figure it out themselves or choose to pivot or switch lanes into something more comfortable. For example, when I was mentioning our platform where authors will upload and download their different drafts, this is so we can keep all the material in one place, have a paper trail, and make sure that everything's being done efficiently and effectively. Mm-hmm. But if an author, say, gets frustrated and decides to send one draft through email, another draft through the platform, comments through text messages, well, if we need to go back and review, it can be very difficult to keep track of all of that stuff. Right. So we simply ask our authors to trust us. We have done this many, many times before, and our process has very much been streamlined and distilled down to the most effective and straightforward way to do this. Trust us, follow the instructions, and if anything is too difficult or just not enjoyable, reach out to us. We're here to help.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that really kind of is emphasized through the guided process. You know, we are transparent about the fact that there are different models of publishing available and transparent about the pros and cons of each, even if that means someone is not choosing to work with a full service assisted self-publishing company at the end of the day. We kind of accept the fact that not every author is going to be for us, and we're not going to be for every author, and that's okay. And
I agree.
So the next myth here is that self-published books aren't available in bookstores. And I know that this is something you touched on a little bit earlier towards the top of the episode, but could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely, I can. So this is one of the longest standing myths because the understanding from authors was that only those traditional publishers had pipelines directly to bookstores, and anything else would require you to print off hundreds, if not thousands, of copies of your book and solicit bookstores and have them carry them on consignment, which is a tricky process which requires a large upfront investment in getting those physical books. No longer the case. That process and way of doing things has gone by the wayside a long time ago. So with print on demand and distribution, using Ingram Spark as our primary example, they have direct access to these bookstores. So Chapters Indigo has full access to Ingram Spark's catalog. Okay. Some bookstores will absolutely choose to just put your book on their shelf when it becomes available if they're interested in it. But what goes on the shelf of a bookstore is up to the discretion of each individual store. Yeah. Some things like those bestsellers we mentioned, those are mandated, but the rest of it is curated by those stores. And there's someone at every store who makes a decision about a self-published book and whether it goes on their shelves or not. Mm-hmm. So will it be on every bookstore shelf by default immediately? Absolutely not. They've never heard of you. They have no reason to put your book on their shelf. However, wise authors generally have a piece of promotional material called a book backgrounder. This is the full rundown on them and their book, elevator pitch, author bio, pricing, and things like that. Essentially the icebreaker for the author when they're reaching out to bookstores. A simple email with this attached or printing it and bringing it in person goes a long, long way to getting your book on their shelf. It contains all the information they need to make an informed decision about that. And then once it is on their shelf, your goal is to market the book to try and get those copies sold. Because if you are looking to be carried on a large scale, you need something that we tend to refer to as demonstrated sales and interest in your book. It's
Right.
much easier to get into a Chapters Indigo location if you say, I've sold 50 books through Chapters specifically in the last 3 months.
Mhm.
So keeping track of that and leveraging that success and momentum goes an absolutely long way. If you are expecting it to be handed to you, for your book to suddenly be in everyone's face simply by virtue of existing, perhaps not. But our goal is to make sure that authors know what they can do within their own comfort zone to make that awareness a reality. And much like everything, it has a momentum. It has a snowball effect. The more bookstores you're carried in, the easier it's going to be to get into others. The more marketing efforts you do, the more those efforts tend to persist either online or in people's awareness, to be discovered later or in word of mouth conversations, and just generally pays itself forward, meaning getting onto more bookstore shelves is just that much more approachable at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think, as someone who has navigated the process from the perspective, at least, of children's books, I found that there was a big misconception that the marketing doesn't start until your book is published and ready to go. And I really found that including my audience from ground zero was really the way to get people invested early on in the process. I would
I agree.
post the different book cover options and ask people to vote on the ones that they liked the best, or, if they preferred to see an activity sheet in the back of the book or a list of resources in the back of the book pertaining to the content. And I think, from there, once you have kind of started to build an audience that is invested, it's easier to then say, I have sold this many copies in an email to Chapters Indigo, and have them come back and say, we're interested because there are people who resonate with this story and the sales have already
Absolutely.
begun. And, you're spot on in that you can't just kind of sit back and hope that the sales and the floodgates will open and your book will fly off the online shelves to the point where a physical location will actually see that happening. I also did a lot of that legwork kind of early on, messaging different brick and mortar locations and asking them to consider, stocking my book as well. And that really seems to be the proactive approach that's needed to put yourself on the radar of these brick and mortar locations. Because as you said, if you're not speaking about your book, chances are nobody else is either.
That's right. You got to build it from the ground up and put the effort in. As we keep saying, you get out of this what you put into it. So if you are excited enough to reach out to the bookstore, there's a good chance that they're going to be excited enough to carry it. So we're here to support authors, but we're not here to control them. So, here's the advice. Please go out and do your very best and know that we have your back.
Yeah, definitely. So with that being said, the next myth here is that you need a large budget to self-publish.
Well, much like a lot of these myths, the understanding of it is a bit subjective. So what constitutes a large budget is different for every author. Some authors consider anything over a few $100s to be a large budget on the project. Some authors consider anything under $10,000 to be a drop in the bucket. In reality, everybody is somewhere in between. It tends to be our opinion, though, that regardless, most authors do not have several thousands of dollars to throw after an ineffective process, or just generally have several $1,000s that they can just lose without worrying about it, right? If you were to put several $1,000s forward, you'd want to know that you are getting your money's worth or the best that you can. So it's always our goal to be honest with authors that the scale of the budget required is dependent on how much of our help you need. There's everything from very approachable packages like our standard publishing package, which is meant primarily just to produce a book for personal use, as it doesn't have a lot in the way of marketing or editing support, all the way up to our traditional publishing package, which is the full bore push across every single facet of publishing. Most of our authors fall somewhere in between, around our professional or all-inclusive packages. So I would say the average budget for an author is between 3,500 to 5,500 Canadian. But things like excessively large word counts, I mean like 100,000 words or more, maybe not excessively large depending on the genre, but large word counts can push your editing quite high, which will impact your costs, of course. Right. And some authors are, how do I put this, disinclined to engage with their own marketing and would prefer to have us just do everything for them. And we absolutely can, but our marketing consultants are incredible at what they do and thus are not, strictly speaking, the cheapest approach. So that help can tend to put your budget over that sort of range that I gave you there. But in reality, that $3,500 to $5,500 budget is what we consider setting yourself up on the best platform to succeed, covering all the gaps that would otherwise trip you up, and giving yourself all of the support, platforms, and direction you'd need to be able to take advantage of any opportunities that present themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, just on the note of budget for those authors, we're one of the few companies that do allow for payment schedules for our authors. We simply don't release the book until it's been paid off in full. So we're happy to work with and collaborate with our authors to help them make their book a reality. Several $1,000s isn't always burning a hole in your pocket, but it may be far more approachable across the next 6 months, for example. Right. So as long as authors are honest with us, we are honest in our efforts to help.
I think that it is also something that is really refreshing is the transparency around the conversation of budget, of price, of, accepting and recognizing that, like you said, not everyone has several $1,000s just itching to be spent. And so it is often a question of what does this investment look like and how will that impact, me and my ability to actually have this book brought from vision to reality. And so I do think that it is really a positive thing to be able to talk about it openly and have those conversations and not kind of hide behind whatever the price point may be and string people along. So our next myth looking to be debunked is that self-publishing is only for ebooks.
Not even close. So, through the miracles of print on demand, all avenues are open, all things are possible, Alyssa. So, if I were to go on to Chapters, Indigo, or Amazon, their online platforms, I would be able to see our authors' books alongside every other professionally published book, and this is printed books. And I can order a copy with a click of a button. Now, that physical book does not yet exist until it is ordered. So at the point that I order it, only then is the book automatically printed, packaged, and shipped straight to the customer. There's no overhead whatsoever in this transaction. So ebooks are wonderful, but they are by no means the only thing that you can self-publish in an approachable manner. In fact, ebooks do not sell nearly as well if they are not accompanied by a paperback edition, which acts as the anchor to the legitimacy of that publication. So yeah, with no overhead to the authors on printed books, there's nothing limiting them. So it means it can get into anybody's hands. There's no need to have boxes and boxes burning a hole in your garage. Ebooks are important. They have a very high profit margin. They are critical for marketing the printed editions as well, but they are by no means the only version you should publish. If it came down to publishing only a paperback or only an ebook, the author should overwhelmingly choose the paperback edition. It will be the better seller of the two.
Definitely.
So definitely not only for ebooks, although that is an important facet, which we absolutely address for our authors here.
And the next myth here is one that we have touched on already and has been kind of a ongoing topic throughout this podcast episode so far, which is that once your book is published, you're done.
Absolutely. Completely done. With the construction and distribution of your book. Now what? Right? Now your job shifts to marketing. The job is not done. You have the thing that you want people to buy. Now it's time to get them to buy it. No one wants to speak to the publisher. They all want to speak to the author. They need to be the driving force behind the marketing and word of mouth around their book. Unless it's only for personal use, at which point, you don't need to talk to yourself in the mirror unless you'd like to. So Yeah, if an author isn't talking about their book, no one else is either. Once it's published, you're nowhere near done. Get ready to hustle. The job's 2/3 done. And if the book is selling well and continues to get interest from your marketing, to be honest with you, that job's kind of never done, right? You're never done talking about your book as long as people are interested in hearing about it.
Absolutely. Keep the momentum going. And not only that, typically at that point, that's when people start to realize the impact that their work can have on other people. And with that comes, maybe the itch for publishing another book. So the work really is ongoing depending on what your final goal is.
I agree.
That next myth that we have is that self-published authors do not get reviews.
Self-published authors absolutely get reviews for their books, but it's generally something that they need to pursue. Your book isn't going to jump out in front of a reviewer's face unless you put it there. So to get the ball rolling for many authors, there are reputable paid review platforms and companies and websites that will review your book, provide honest but critical feedback on the content. This is valuable in a couple of ways. Number one, it's an outside, unbiased perspective for the author to take in and take action on as they see fit. It's also very useful, should it be positive feedback, in the marketing for their book. So companies like Indie Reader provide Indie Reader approved badges, which can go on the front of the graphic design of your book and very much help sell. When your book does meet those requirements, 4 out of 5 stars, for example, you get featured on the front of their website. So rather than trying to reach out to your favorite best-selling author to get them to read and review their book, which they are inundated with requests for, it is generally best to go to one of these companies who has an interest in providing the honest and critical feedback, and then using that as your platform to get more reader reviews going forwards through a number of different ways and challenges, all of which are things that we cover as part of our marketing efforts here at Tellwell.
Definitely. And we do have a couple of upcoming videos where we will be talking about some of those additional methods of trying to garner reviews and position your books. So stay tuned for those. The next myth here, we have 2 left, is that self-published books don't win awards.
Well, I think it's become evident that I believe in our authors, right? But I also believe in the fact that it does require effort, and you can be the best person with the best book in the world, but it goes nowhere if you don't put energy behind it. So I disagree with this one big time. I've seen dozens of our books win awards over the years. The thing that holds authors back the most, in my experience, has simply been the fear of applying for those awards. Not winning can be emotionally impactful for a lot of authors who have invested in their book, and hearing negative feedback never feels good. So a lot of authors tend to refrain from making these applications because you can't lose something you never participated in. That being said, you can't win it either. And I've seen so many authors underestimate their books and come out with great awards and great feedback because other people do value what they've written. So I would say if you've had your book professionally edited and you've given it your time and attention, it is worth it. You have everything to gain by applying for awards and ideally, hopefully, winning them. But should you not win them, nobody knows but you.
Yep, that is valid. And the last myth here is that self-publishing is a trend that will fade.
Not if I have anything to say about it. Yeah, not on your life. The word's out. Self-publishing is approachable, it's high quality, it's affordable, and it is profitable. So I've been doing this with Tellwell for nearly 10 years, as I mentioned. And every year, the amount of authors working with us increases, the quality of their productions soar, and the satisfaction those authors get from us increases year in and year out as we put the efforts to improve constantly. If Tellwell was as predatory as many as the other self-publishing companies out there, then I would agree with you. It is a trend that could very easily fade, but we're not. I think the trend will shift more towards companies like ourselves that tend to be more honest and simply wish to be paid for our professional services so that we can give our authors the best experience possible. I feel that that is going to become more prevalent as the more predatory companies fade out. The way we treat our authors, we treat them like the way we would like to be treated in their position. At every turn, we ask ourselves, if I were in my author's position, what would I want to have done? And we tend to be pretty picky. So at the end of the day, this has resonated with our authors over and over. So as long as there's companies like Tellwell that love books, care for their authors, and take pride in their work, then I don't see self-publishing ever fading away.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight throughout this conversation, Mitch. It's been much appreciated. We do have one last segment here called The Plot Thickens, which are user-submitted questions. If you are not currently following us on Instagram, please be sure to do so at Tellwell Publishing. I do post whenever we are recording with guests and ask for questions to be submitted pertaining to each of those guests. So these ones came in specifically for you, Mitch. The first question is, what is the most challenging part of your job? And on the flip side, what is the most rewarding part?
Okay, so the most rewarding part, let's start with the most challenging part and then finish on the positive. So the most challenging part of my job is working with authors who have suffered trauma or misfortune in their lives. They've had poor experiences, they've been treated poorly, they've lost someone important to them. These traumatic events in an author's life very, very much spawn the creative writing process in a lot of cases, and it can be a lot of catharsis for those authors, and they feel that writing helped them so much that perhaps the perspective can help a lot of other readers out there.
Right.
And it is true. We've seen it be true over multiple different books over the years. However, those conversations can be emotionally devastating in a lot of cases for both the authors and for ourselves as consultants. We're human as well. We love our authors and we share empathy and sympathy with them. So in a lot of cases, authors have had full breakdowns on the phone, and more than once, we've had full breakdowns with them. And it's understandable, right? These stories are emotionally impactful. They're meant to be emotionally impactful for the people who hear them as well. We're not immune to that. Hearing those challenges and the things that have hurt our authors over the years, I think that would probably be the most challenging part of my job. And especially listening to that and then having to shift into the more pragmatic aspects of discussing their publishing, it can feel like a disconnect. So that tends to not be my favorite part. But in addition to that, the most rewarding part is helping those authors make their books a reality, accomplishing this dream that they've had, or helping them to just make it real at the end of the day and help them help others. Right. The feedback, the gratitude, and just the connection we get as publishing consultants with our authors is by far the most rewarding part. I have authors who text me just to see how I'm doing, wish me Merry Christmas, things like this. And I do the same for them. Because at this point, we've gone far past simple business relationships and into the realm of friendships, as these authors will frequently trust us for many books going forwards across the years. So yeah, that would be both the most challenging and rewarding parts of the job for me. One does not really come without the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really speaks to the humanness of Tellwell and the people within that team. And so the second question that has been submitted is, when someone commits to working with Tellwell, what does the process look like? Is the team consistent, or are you bounced to whichever team member is available?
Amazing question. This is a great question. So what does the process look like? That is literally a half an hour conversation I have with a first-time author, so we're just going to touch on it quickly here. The process for publishing. Like, let's say you've committed to working with us. Well, initially, you get a lot of information emails from us to help bring you up to speed, and questionnaires so that you can think about what you want for the book and have it in writing so that we can refer to that and avoid making mistakes. At that point, an author has their own project manager. The project manager takes over for us consultants. we know everything about everything. They're the ones who actually know how to do it, though. So our project managers are very much our equal but potentially greater companions on the other side once production begins. And once you've gotten to meet your project manager, you'll be submitting your material, you'll be uploading it through our platform, our dashboard that we have there for you, and then your team will get to work on the book. Now, in order to keep everything effective and efficient, custody of information is very important. So everything here at Tellwell goes through your project manager first and then to the rest of your team. So in that respect, you're not working and chatting directly with your designer, for example. Your project manager is relaying your instructions to them. But you do get to work directly with your editor and your marketing consultant and your project manager as well. So there is definitely face-to-face and direct communication, but we go through the process step by step with diligent revision and review, lots of explanation around timelines, so that when we do finally get to the end, the author has signed off on their final draft. The goal here is that they are deliriously happy about it and are ready to move forward with their marketing and work with us effectively. So that's kind of what the process looks like. But my advice for our authors is to put lots of effort into planning what they want their book to look like when it is done, because the aspect that derails publishing the most is when we get to aspects like cover design or interior layout and the author goes, I don't know, won't you do that for me?
Right.
And spend several hours and energy and resources creating something you'd hate. We think not. Please come to the table with an idea so that we can put it together and you can tell us what you hate about it so we can fix it and make sure that's something that you love at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Give a general reference starting point.
Yeah. Oh, is the team consistent? Yes, it is, unless your project manager happens to be unavailable because they are sick or something like that, at which point we will switch you. But we're never going to jump between editors or marketing consultants. You know, certain people have certain specialties. So one marketing consultant may create your author website while the other one does your outreach, for example. But overall, it is very consistent and organic. We have notes, we pass everything forward, so there's a lot of communication. So no, you are not bounced around from team member to team member if we can possibly avoid it. But if someone's not available, they are simply unavailable, and that can't be helped.
Amazing. Great answer. And last but not least, we've got a couple fun rapid fire questions for you here because you have spent the entire episode being on your A game and now it is time for some fun. So what is one thing at your workstation that you can't be without?
Oh my Lord. All of it? So I have a prolific nerd hobbies that I pursue, and a bit about me is I actually suffer from ADHD, so I need to take little breaks in between the things that I'm doing. So between one phone call and another, I will pick up something and perhaps do a little bit of painting. So I have a whole paint station sitting at my desk for when I am just having a break in between appointments or chatting with our authors in a more just back and forth perspective. Other than that, the thing that I can't do without, just the decorations in here. This place makes me feel like home. It's all covered in nerd stuff. You can't see it, but honestly, just being covered in all the things that make me happy is the things that I can't do without.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that leads me into one of these other rapid fire questions, which is, do you prefer in-office or remote? Because I know that things looked a little different pre-pandemic here. So in-office or remote?
For me, I'm a remote worker. Even when in-office was our option and our main way of doing things, the commute for me was a bit challenging. And I found that just too much time that could be spent with authors was spent taking an hour into the office and an hour back every day. So when COVID happened and productivity skyrocketed because everybody worked from home, I think we all sort of realized that there wasn't a lot of benefit in us all being in the same room together when we were still chatting with each other through internal chats anyhow. So for me, it's definitely remote. I have more availability for my authors and more flexibility. And it means that I get to do things like pick my children up from school, which is very rewarding for me. So yeah, absolutely remote work. Yeah. And then I get to be surrounded by all my nice things too.
Yeah, it puts you in a great mood. You're productive. I mean, there's nothing that can really beat that. So I guess maybe leaning a bit into some of this nerd hobbies that you are referencing, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
Okay, so my favorite pastime is either collecting and reading comic books, which I've been doing since I was a young lad. Bookshelves after bookshelves, boxes after boxes of them. I'm surrounded by them in here. So that's my one hobby, but that's book related, so you could assume that of me. But beyond that, me and my youngest son play a game called Warhammer. So we tend to play that a fair amount. We paint figures together. We just spend some quality time doing that together. So yeah, that would probably be my favorite pastime, gaming and spending some time with my boys.
Amazing. I love that so much. And then last question is, do you prefer an e-reader or a physical book?
Physical book. I have e-readers, of course. I frequently buy books in both ebook and physical book because sometimes I don't want to throw a massive doorstopper into my backpack as I'm traveling. So I'll have it on like my phone or a device instead. But given the opportunity, I am always a physical book person. There's simply nothing that can really beat the realities of just having a book.
Having a physical book at the ready. Yep. Wow. You're not kidding about physical the doorstopper.
No, never.
I don't know. You probably can't see it here, but I do have a limited edition collection of the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well as The Hobbit. Beautiful. All up on my shelf above me. That's just similar in thickness, just a honker that would be difficult to carry around.
They sure are. Absolutely. I sympathize with you there. Bookshelves after bookshelves in this home.
Absolutely. Well, I would expect nothing less from Tellwell's longest running publishing consultant. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mitch. And thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye.